A herpetologist from Florida heads up into the cloud forests above the Monteverde area of Costa Rica looking for a special creature, the golden toad. A brilliant colored amphibian, the males were a bright orange that easily stood out against the dark greens and browns of the forest. After major rains in March and April, pools would fill up on the high ridges, and these toads would gather in great quantities to breed. The last time such a spectacular breeding episode had been seen was 2 years prior. It had been a rainy year, and the conditions should have been perfect for them. Today, though, on the edge of a pool, a male golden toad sat alone, a single spot of day-glow orange on the damp and gloomy cloud forest floor. This would be among the last times the species would ever be seen. The extinction of the golden toad is perhaps the most disturbing extinction in recent history, not because of a long drawn-out battle against habitat loss and overhunting. The toad's entire known geographic range was protected, and it was incredibly difficult to locate outside the breeding season. No, the extinction of the golden toad is disturbing because it was swift, mysterious, and right in the middle of a protected forest. Not only that, the disappearance of the golden toad was not an isolated event. It is part of a larger pattern of amphibian extinctions and decline. What is responsible? Can other amphibians be spared this fate? It's time to pour yourself a hot beverage, cuddle up with your favorite stuffed animal, and come with me on this twisted case to find out who killed the golden toad. North of the Central Valley of Costa Rica lies the Tiburon Mountains. These mountains reach into the clouds and are home to perhaps the world's most famous cloud forest. An ethereal world lost in the mists. Moss and epiphytes like bromeliads, tillandsia, and microorchids grow thick on the trunks and branches of trees. Perhaps among them are the flowing tail feathers of a resplendent quetzal, perched while it scans for wild avocados. Dazzling hummingbirds hover around flowers, and butterflies flutter through the still air. A large coati family might forage across a trail. In the dark undergrowth, strange invertebrates and understory birds can be glimpsed. Though now rare and difficult to find, these forests were also home to a plentitude of colorful amphibians that could be heard in the night, or seen along the flowing watercourses stalked by sunbitterns. The Monteverde area is a collection of towns in an area built onto the Pacific slope of the Tiburon Mountains. The main town is Santa Elena, not Monteverde, which is a community further upslope. These communities are pretty isolated from the rest of the country below, with only a few roads carved into the mountains allowing vehicles to travel to this string of small towns. The story of how the town of Monteverde was formed and how its cloud forests, along with the life it holds, became famous does not start in Costa Rica. It starts in Alabama and a group of people sent to prison for not registering for the United States military draft. These men were Quakers, a pacifist religion who were conscientious objectors to such a program, fearing they would be forced to be soldiers. They decided that when they got out, they would take the sentencing judge's advice, who had told them if they didn't want to register, then they should leave the country. And so after their release, around 25 members in a community of Alabama Quakers began searching for a place to relocate to. On an agricultural tour of Central America a few members went on, they discovered the country of Costa Rica, with friendly people and a recently abolished army, and soon made the move. After 6 months of living in the capital while searching for a perfect place to settle, a few traveled to the tiny community of Cerro Plano above Santa Elena and decided to purchase an area of cloud forest above there. They named the community Monteverde, Green Mountain, and began clearing forests to grow crops and soon pasture to support a growing dairy industry. Though Monteverde receives plenty of precipitation in the rainy season, during the dry season it can be quite dry at lower elevation. Only the high cloud forest retains moisture, and the forest itself is important in catching the mists and preventing erosion. From the beginning, the community wanted to ensure the critical watershed of the cloud forest was protected. This resulted in a 554-hectare patch of forest that would form the beginning of the Monteverde Cloud Forest Preserve. In 1963, the first biologists visited the area to study army ants. In 1970, 2 biologists came for postgraduate work, and alarmed by the rate of deforestation, began purchasing land, and one member of the community, Wolf Guindon, who was one of the Quakers jailed in the U.S., now the community's chainsaw salesman, a farmer, and land developer, decided to help them. From the initial watershed, the reserve began growing and receiving financial backing from other conservation organizations. Ultimately, the land would be transferred to the Tropical Science Center in San Jose in order to get land from the Guadalcanal Land Company, who owned a large area around the Tiburon Mountains, and had been the landowners of the area the Quakers bought to form Monteverde in the beginning. This put the cloud forest under the administration of the Tropical Science Center, as it is today. At first, only biologists visited the forest, but soon curiosity from tourists began bringing them up to the area and into the cloud forest, and so the cloud forest began charging a walk-in fee. Many people in the community, though, were not sure how the reserve would make money and wondering what they would get out of it. However, soon tourists began showing up in greater and greater numbers, allowing the development of a hotel, then another, and shops, and restaurants that now are all around the Monteverde area, all because of the Cloud Forest Preserve. Eco-tourists hoping to experience nature come in droves, and the preserve is a world-famous attraction, with its concrete trails snaking through the misty forests, or leading over its famous Red Bridge. Beyond this reserve are more protected areas, like the Children's Eternal Rainforest and the Curicancha Reserve. Santa Elena has its own Cloud Forest Preserve above the town, and pretty much the entire ridgeline, save a clearing for some TV towers, is forested. Many hotels and lodges have their own patch of forest for their guests. There are also patches of forest left alone for ziplining operations, which have become more common as adventure tourism has become popular in the region. The amount of tourists is not all good news, as prices for land in the area rise, and the number of tourists trying to get into the cloud forest, or crowding the trails to see a quetzal, can seem almost ludicrous. Fortunately, tourists can only access a small portion of this preserve, and beyond the crowds on the trails, there is forest where nature can live in peace, without encountering man. On the continental divide of the Tiburon Mountains above Monteverde is a windswept, perpetually wet area known as Brillante. Winds whip through the trapped clouds blanketing the ridge, pelting the land with rain. The conditions are so rough, trees are stunted, the wind twisting their trunk and branches into a scene out of a fantasy story, so it may not be surprising this kind of habitat is known as elfin forest. As the people of Monteverde expanded pasture around the growing community, a few intrepid farmers hoped to create some up in Brillante, where they could raise dairy cattle on lush grass grown in the wet conditions. Here, in 1963, a young Quaker named Jerry James encountered something spectacular. Bright golden amphibians mating in huge numbers. In May of 1964, several biologists were led into this region by one of the men who had been hoping to farm up here. One of the biologists, J. Savage, would go on to publish the description of this spectacular amphibian in 1966, dubbing it Bufo periglenes, meaning bright toad in Latin. In April and May, downpours of rain brought the dry season to an end. These rains would fill up various depressions in the ground up in the Brillante region, forming pools. Materializing from the leaf litter in their burrows, male golden toads, a bright, almost day-glow orange color, would swarm around these pools, awaiting the females who would arrive in a few days. This breeding behavior is known as explosive breeding. The females were larger and looked very different, brown with black and scarlet spots. When the females arrived, the males would crowd around and compete to be the male to climb up on her back and hold her in an embrace, called amplexus. Once a male climbed on top of a female, he had to hold on while other males tried to push him off, and during this process the males were vocal, using their calls to intimidate rivals. This intense competition was driven by skewed sex ratios, which could be 18-1. Eventually, the lucky couple would get to the water and he could fertilize her eggs. Females laid around 200 eggs in 2 strings. The young were then in a race to hatch, grow, and metamorphose into toadlets before the pond dried up. During this period, the tadpoles and eggs were also vulnerable to predatory crabs that would enter the pools looking for an easy meal. The adult toads may have been toxic, as the few toads found predated on were eaten in such a way as not to disturb the area other toads have poison glands. The breeding system of the golden toad has some remarkable similarities to desert amphibians like the spadefoot toad, which come out of the ground with the desert monsoons and explosively breed, then disappear quickly while their eggs and tadpoles must quickly develop before the pool dries and they desiccate under the desert sun. For the golden toads, some years pools dried too fast and the eggs and tadpoles all died, while in others, little toadlets with black and white polka-dotted bellies would hop from the pools and vanish into the leaf litter. Outside the breeding season, golden toads lived in burrows among the roots and leaf litter of the elfin forest. At this time of year, the adult golden toad males were a dull orange color and very difficult to find. The golden toad was actually very important to the formation of the Cloud Forest Preserve, and its presence can still be felt in the Monteverde area, where its image graces the official coat of arms and many souvenirs, some of which I returned with. The Cloud Forest Preserve's growth began with expanding to cover the known range of the golden toad. The areas of Brillante that could be found were purchased and added to the Cloud Forest Preserve, protected from development, until its entire global distribution of somewhere between 4 and 10 square kilometers was under the protection of the preserve. As public awareness of these amazing little amphibians spread, it drummed up curiosity in the Cloud Forest Preserve and probably contributed to adding Monteverde to the map. To satiate curiosity about these amphibians, a specimen was kept in a terrarium in the guardhouse at the entrance to the preserve, though they never took well to this setup and would be released and replaced by another. The unusual breeding strategy of these amphibians drew several scientists to the cloud forests to study them. John Vandenberg compared the golden toad with a species found in a similar habitat on a volcano in central Costa Rica. In 1985, the Metro Toronto Zoo requested permission to export some to Canada to do a breeding ecology project in captivity, but no one at the Tropical Science Center would grant the request. In 1987, Dr. Martha Crump, a herpetologist from the University of Florida in Gainesville, arrived to study tree frogs, but came at just the right time to witness golden toads breeding and decided to work on studying their breeding ecology in situ. She started collecting some data, and reserve personnel counted 1,500 toads that year. However, the pools dried up and only around 30 tadpoles survived to metamorphose into toadlets. Crump received funding to conduct a 2-year study starting in 1988. 1988 was a drought year, and the rains were delayed. The toads did not appear in the first few weeks of May, and when the rains did finally arrive, only 10 toads were spotted, with only one in the study area. The next year was wetter, but again Martha only found a single toad. A little later in the breeding season, 2 rangers patrolling a more remote part of Brillante saw 10 adults, the last golden toads ever observed. The golden toad was not alone. The species John Vandenberg was comparing with the golden toad vanished in 1987, along with many other species of amphibians native to pristine forest above 800 meters. Colorful harlequin toads, once common along the creeks, are gone from the area, and when I went looking for amphibians in the night, I found none. Just hearing a handful of glass frogs somewhere in the foliage. This decline of amphibians, though, expanded beyond Monteverde, with collapses of amphibian populations occurring across Mesoamerica and then the world in what is now called the amphibian decline crisis. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature lists multiple reasons for the extinction of the golden toad, including its restricted range, airborne pollution, chytridiomycosis, and global warming. Other potential suspects have been suggested over the years, and in total there are 8 suspects I have chosen to investigate. Did an increase in UVB radiation get the toads? Was it a natural cycle in the population that led to its disappearance? Or was it their restricted range? Could airborne pollution have done them in? Were they all wiped out by a deadly fungus? Did the international trade in reptiles and amphibians introduce pathogens or overcollect these iconic toads? Was it the El Niño that dried the breeding pools in 1987 and then delayed rains in 1988? Or was the golden toad one of the first victims of global warming? Let's go through the potential suspects and find out which are responsible. The sun emits many types of radiation that continuously bombard Earth, including UVB radiation. This radiation is particularly damaging to living things, suppressing the immune system and even leading to skin cancer with enough exposure. Fortunately, UVB radiation is reflected off the Earth's ozone layer. Unfortunately, during the 20th century, the use of certain man-made chemicals began depleting the ozone layer, and these changes began being noticed in the late 80s. In 1979, in the Cascades of North America, a frog and a toad being studied to understand their ecology had massive die-offs of fertilized eggs in remote lakes. As the research continued, adult amphibians began to become rarer. The scientists wanted to solve this amphibian decline and so began ruling out potential causes. They brought eggs into the laboratory where they hatched normally, which ruled out water chemistry and pollution. Then they began hearing about ozone depletion and wondered if increased UVB radiation could be killing the frog eggs. So they placed some eggs in the lakes under UVB shielding material, and those that were hatched normally. They also suspected since UVB radiation can suppress the immune system, it may allow a fungus, possibly introduced by stocking trout into the alpine lakes, to infect and kill developing embryos and possibly the adults. Did something similar happen to the golden toad? Well, it is less clear-cut than with the amphibians of the Cascades. During the time the golden toad disappeared, there was no detected rise in UVB radiation. Furthermore, living in burrows, adults would likely not receive much UVB radiation, and the shade of elfin trees and the dense clouds hanging over Brilliante should have protected eggs, unlike the bright, unshaded shallows of an alpine lake. Populations of organisms change over time. Some years an organism may be common, in others it can become quite rare. When widespread amphibian decline started being noticed, an ongoing long-term study offered a potential answer. The researchers studied 4 species over a 12-year period at a breeding pond in South Carolina. They found wild variation in breeding populations, with amphibians entirely skipping dry years, only to reappear in wetter years. They found this cycle to be relatively stable, and any declines they noticed could be explained by drought years and not any other direct human-driven cause. The last time a large breeding group of golden toads were seen was in 1987, and though 1988 was another dry year, the next few years were more or less normal. This indicates that the species is most likely extinct, the last one dying before the rainy season in 1990, and that if the extinction was part of a natural cycle, another factor must have been involved to tip the species into extinction. The golden toad was restricted to probably only a few square kilometers of Brilliante. Could just the fact it had such a small range have been enough to cause it to disappear? It is pretty well known that species with smaller ranges are more likely to go extinct due to random chance events. Though a restricted range probably helped contribute to the toad's disappearance, like with the natural cycle, some other factor must have been the event that caused it to ultimately go extinct. Amphibians do a fair amount of cutaneous respiration, that is, they breathe through their skin. This means amphibian skin is quite porous, and so it is easy for pollutants to enter their bodies. For a toad rehydrating during the rainy season in preparation for breeding, it may absorb a volume 60% to 70% of its normal body water content. Dehydrated toads therefore may not have enough water to dilute these chemicals in their environment. Cloud water collected from Monteverde in 1987 contained abnormally high amounts of phosphates and nitrates. These seem to be derived from fertilizer. Pollutants have many impacts on amphibians. Some mess with the nervous system, others cause abnormal growth of extra eyes and limbs, and others mess with hormones, including entire frog populations rendered female due to exposure to an estrogen-like compound. Most amphibian studies on chemical pollution focus on pesticide use, not fertilizer. This means we do not fully understand how amphibians interact with these chemicals, and so we really cannot say for sure how much of a role these chemicals played in the extinction of this amphibian. If you have heard much about the amphibian decline crisis, you likely have heard about the dreaded chytrid fungus. The parasitic fungus, Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, described to Science in 1999 as scientists searched for what was causing amphibian declines all over the world, is a pathogen that infects the outer layer of skin in amphibians, sometimes resulting in a disease called chytridiomycosis. Because amphibians have fairly permeable skin to regulate oxygen, water, heat, and ions in their bodies, once a threshold of around 10,000 zoospores have infected a host and begun to grow, an amphibian can no longer regulate these essential elements, ultimately resulting in the death of the amphibian. The arrival of the fungus seems linked with the declines in amphibians. Sometime in the early 1980s, high-elevation salamander communities began crashing in Guatemala, presumably as chytrid spread out of Mexico at the end of the 70s. Then, by the late 80s, it reached Monteverde. It proceeded to spread south through Costa Rica during the 90s, reaching Panama in the 2000s. Researchers positioned themselves ahead of this wave in the middle of the country and tested for the fungus, not finding it, or rapid amphibian declines. In 2004, chytrid was found at the site and mortality in adult frogs spiked. Here, another beautiful golden amphibian was hard hit, the Panamanian golden frog, which probably disappeared from the wild by 2008. Chytrid may seem to be the perfect prime suspect for the disappearance of the golden toad, but this hypothesis has issues. Chytrid fungus does not do well in dry and warm conditions, requiring water for its spores to travel to hosts, and is more associated with killing amphibians in winter. The believed year of the population collapse was unusually warm and dry. Furthermore, a recent study cast doubt on chytrid as the major driver of global amphibian declines, with most species having insufficient data to really claim chytrid drove their declines. 3 preserved specimens of the golden toad were found to be negative for the fungus, but that probably means they were collected prior to its arrival, or the fungal DNA was too damaged to test for. Chytrid is still a suspect of interest. The widespread trade in live amphibians is something that began long before the discovery of the golden toad, and possibly had 2 negative consequences on this species and contributed to its extinction. First, the pet trade. The keeping of amphibians and reptiles as pets can mean the collection of wild specimens, unless there is a completely captive stock to draw from. New and exciting species catch the eye of collectors and get imported out of the country, sometimes illegally. Apparently, when the species was still common, dealers in the United States and Germany got their hands on them and had live golden toads available for around $5. However, the nature of the amphibian's life history would have made it very hard for poachers to get, and even harder to collect so many that the population would have crashed. Sadly, unlike some species which now only exist because a few were collected prior to some other event that caused them to go extinct, the golden toad probably is not living in someone's basement, as they did not seem to do well in captivity, spent most of their time hiding, not in the open, requiring a collector who really wanted to breed them, and had the very special setup they likely required. Besides the pet trade, live amphibians get moved around for medical research, particularly the African clawed frog. The oldest discovered specimen of a chytrid-infected frog is one of these amphibians collected in 1938. These frogs do not exhibit the die-offs associated with chytridiomycosis, but act as reservoirs. They are also adaptable and have established small populations all over the world from escaped specimens. It is possible they brought the chytrid fungus from Africa to North America, where it spread southwards towards Monteverde. However, there is no evidence that the chytrid fungus originated in Africa in African clawed frogs. In the winter of 1986 and 1987, sea surface temperatures in the Central Pacific were unusually warm. The rain that came to end the dry season in Monteverde was not enough to keep the golden toad's breeding pools full during this warm year, leaving Brillante unusually dry and hot. 1987 was an El Niño year, basically just a year that the Central Pacific sea surface is warmer than normal, causing some areas around the Pacific to be drier, like Central America, while others, like Pacific Islands, receive more precipitation. In 1987, the pools dried up prematurely, and few toads metamorphosed out of the tadpole phase. The next year, with continuing drought, delayed rains led to no toads breeding, and the drier weather could have also killed adults, letting them desiccate in drying soils and otherwise stress these sensitive amphibians. This El Niño seems to have come at a critical point that eliminated the species. Human civilization has been dumping large amounts of previously sequestered carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by burning it for industry, electricity, and transportation. Carbon dioxide interacts with light radiation coming into Earth's atmosphere, trapping it, making the planet warmer. Warmer temperatures probably help raise Pacific sea surface temperatures, bringing about an El Niño. However, this is extremely complicated, and scientists are yet to untangle how these two things relate beyond simple logic, leaving a lack of consensus on what climate change means for strength, occurrence, and length of such events. Essentially, the data can support longer, shorter, weaker, stronger, more, and less of such events. It seems logical, however, to suggest that warmer temperatures globally lead to warmer Pacific sea surface temperatures. The data just still has to be teased apart. Increasing temperatures have other potential impacts that could have been devastating without involving El Niño. Tropical mountain species are really the creatures at the greatest risk from rising temperatures. Without the distinctive seasons of temperate zones, tropical mountain species are adapted to only a tiny range of climatic conditions. Polar bears, often seen as the poster child for climate change risk, can live at temperatures ranging from far below freezing to quite warm. It is loss of habitat and access to food that threatens them. They are not at risk of simply overheating like tropical mountain species. Species can move up slope, but if a species lives only at the top of a mountain or ridge, like the golden toads, there is nowhere to go up slope to. Finally, another hypothesis links increasing temperatures with the chytrid fungus. As stated previously, warm or drier conditions should be bad for the fungus, but this paradox can be resolved. In the lowland forests of Costa Rica, and I can attest to this, the night is full of frogs. Why are they still common, while Montverde is basically frogless? During the day, these forests get pretty hot. Chytrid stops growing at 28 degrees Celsius and dies at 30. This protects these amphibians. Frogs can still be found in the true highlands reportedly, where the night gets far below the optimal growth temperature of the fungus. But the mid-level elevations, like the cloud forests of Monteverde, are just right for the fungus to proliferate, especially with climate change, where the trend in Monteverde seems to be a more consistent temperature between day and night, probably due to increased evaporation leading to more cloud cover, keeping the days cooler, and trapping the heat of the day for the night, making things perfect for chytrid. So what killed the golden toad? What do you think did it? Okay, ready? So how does UVB radiation stand? Probably not guilty. How about being part of a natural cycle? Perhaps involved, but really just an accomplice to a different suspect. How about the amphibian's restricted range? Like the natural cycle hypothesis, this may have only allowed another event to deal a deadly blow, not the real cause. How about airborne pollution? This really needs to be looked at in more detail. Now we get to the dreaded chytrid fungus. Probably guilty. The wild animal trade? Probably not guilty of over-collecting the species, but not enough evidence to say whether or not it brought chytrid to the Americas. How about El Niño? Probably guilty. Finally, was the golden toad a victim of global warming? While still requiring certain factors to be untangled and resolved, it likely helped the fungus grow and related to the El Niño event. These two simultaneous events, in conjunction with the species' restricted range and possibly a natural downturn in the population, sent this beautiful photogenic amphibian into an inescapable extinction spiral. The high-profile nature of the disappearance of the golden toad has made it a poster child for global amphibian declines. Likely due to its extinction, Panamanian golden frogs were collected for captive breeding, and this beautiful little harlequin toad persists in a reasonably large captive breeding program. And some of this frog's close relatives, also destroyed in the wake of the chytrid fungus, are currently being re-released into the wild. In the southwestern United States, similar captive breeding efforts are underway to protect the Chiricahua leopard frog, ravaged by chytrid and habitat destruction, such as this program at the Phoenix Zoo. In the southern Rocky Mountains of Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, the boreal toad, an alpine amphibian, has been declining due to chytrid, and many zoos in the region now breed the species. Many other amphibians have been put in captive breeding programs in the aftermath of the golden toad's disappearance, including these beautiful Kaiser's mountain newts, keeping these lineages in existence in so-called amphibian arks with the hope they can hop free once more. Years after the disappearance of amphibians in the Montverde area, some species have been rediscovered. Even those toads that John Vandenberg was comparing and contrasting with the golden toad reappeared, though it is incredibly rare. It is not all good news in the Tilleron Mountains, though. As the temperature increases, the cloud layer rises above the ridgeline, not depositing its life-giving mists in the cloud forest. Without the clouds, Monteverde loses its distinction as a rainforest, with its total precipitation halved. When I was walking these forests during the supposed rainy season, I was shocked to find even higher in the proper cloud forest, relatively dry soil. With this climatic shift, other species are now in decline. This large black Jerusalem cricket, once common, seems now to be restricted to the high ridges and elfin forest. The resplendent quetzal, which in the absence of the golden toad took over as the emblem of the area, also has shown population declines throughout its range. Only time and our response to global warming will tell if these and many other tropical mountain species have a future. Sadly, though, the beautiful golden toad does not.